Y'all better quiet down. I've been trying to get up here all day for your gay brothers and your gay sisters. I believe in the gay power. I believe in us getting our rights, or I would not be out there fighting for our rights. That's all I wanted to say to you people. The people are trying to do something for all of us, and not men and women that belong to a white middle-class white club. And that's what you all belong to. Those are the words of Sylvia Rivera, a transgender woman present at the Stonewall riots, the founder of the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, a beloved activist, a mother to many, many queer people who needed protection, needed some place to stay, needed help getting out of prison. Books upon books on the riots and queer history would lead you to believe that the only people involved were white gay men. There is little mention of Sylvia or Marcia or Rusty or Stormy or any of the women that we know were there, because queer history, like all history, is subject to white-centric, patriarchal lenses that we use to look at everything. Women and people of color are a footnote in history. Now, I use the word queer today intentionally. I use it here as a specific, radical statement, as an overt reference to the verb to queer. From queer history, to queer means to question heteronormativity, to challenge the many intersections of oppression that we experience, and to subvert the dominant culture. As such, the word queer is not me or you or who anyone is, but what we are doing. Last year, I gave a sermon for Pride Month that told the stories of LGBTQ folks in our congregation. I'm afraid that I, very wrongly, told exclusively the stories of white people, which is a disservice to the entire queer community. By not centering the most marginalized voices among us, I upheld white supremacy. In doing these things, I've contributed to what we might call homonormativity. There is and has been an argument in favor of respectability, that if only we do what our oppressors want us to do, we might finally be liberated. There is a tendency among queer folks, particularly white queer folks, to portray a clean-cut public image that fits into heterosexual assumptions and institutions. Homosexual organizations in the 1950s and 60s required protesters to be dressed professionally and as the gender they were expected to be. Sylvia Rivera joked, "Yeah, there were lots of other little groups, but you had to be what they called normal homosexuals. They wore suits and ties. One of the first demonstrations that they had, lesbians who'd never even wore dresses were wearing dresses and high heels to show the world that they were normal." Many people have tried this. I've tried this. I know how to play my role, and for example, when at work I need to be taken especially seriously, I wear a dress and round out my accent and raise the pitch of my voice. A lot of us know a little something about assimilation. But what exactly are we even assimilating to? Patriarchy and white supremacy are dependent on the concentration of power to a privileged few. White men are the standard because they created the standard. And that power benefits oppressors who can punish anyone who transgresses their idea of normal. Homonormativity, complying to that standard, feeds into the power of injustice and rewards those who are visibly integrating themselves into the dominant norm. Queer people are punished for the ways we have failed to assimilate to white patriarchy, and femininity is especially a punishable offense. Transgender women and gay men are often subjected to a similar kind of violence, as both groups are seen, disgustingly, as incorrectly male. Because society's view of queerness zeroes in on gay men and transgender women, particularly people of color, they are the target, statistically, of the majority of hate-related violence. White gay men, however, come from a particular place of vulnerable privilege. Gay men still benefit from the patriarchy, as all white queer folks still benefit from white supremacy. We cannot ignore that a lot of white gay men's culture, that which has become the face of Pride and the LGBTQ movement, has been appropriated from black culture, from black queer culture. Words and phrases, mannerisms, music, fashion. And a lot of what hasn't been taken from people of color has been taken from heteronormative middle-class culture, expensive, traditional, comfortable. In taking signifiers of the oppressed identities of people of color and blending them into privileges regarding classism, patriarchy, and whiteness, we are still catering to the dominant culture. It's assimilation with a twist. This has been an issue in the queer liberation movement from the beginning. And in the 1960s and 70s, we can see writings from various independent queer newsletters and magazines that are examining and questioning oppression within the community. Leo E. Lawrence writes in 1969, homosexual organizations have timid leaders with enormous ego trips, middle-class bigotry and racism, and too many middle-aged, uptight conservatives. The same year, the publication Gay Power printed a radical manifesto stating, "We declare our support as homosexual youth for the struggles of the Black, the feminist, the Spanish American, the Indian, the hippie, the young, the student, and other victims of oppression and prejudice." Carl Whitman wrote in 1969 of, quote, "mixed identities," and he says, "Many of us are gay and also are part of another group trying to free itself." Later in the same piece, he says, "There is a tendency among homosexual groups to deplore gays who play visible roles, queens. As liberated gays, we must take a clear stand. Gays who stand out have been the most courageous among us." From John Gabry the same year, "A generation gap seems to exist for homosexuals as it does for other minorities. Last week it was the younger ones who seemed most determined not to hide." In 1970, the group Radical Lesbians writes, "Woman and person are contradictory terms." In 1971, Elandria Lee Henderson penned Black and Lavender, the Black Lesbian, the piece from which comes the quote in your order of service. Marsha P. Johnson in 1972, "A lot of gay brothers don't like women. I would like to see STAR get closer to the Gay Activist Alliance and other gay people in the community." That same year, Sylvia Rivera said, "Sisters and brothers, remember that transvestites are not the scum of the earth. You should be proud that we are part of the community." Does any of this sound contemporary? These concerns, that queer people of color, trans people, anyone of multiple oppressed identities are being silenced in favor of the dominant culture, is nothing new. And yet the harm and pain caused continues. Patriarchy and white supremacy are not buzzwords that are victimizing those of privileged identities. They are words that represent ideas and beliefs that manifest not only in our systems, but in our daily interactions and lives that have caused and continue to cause real trauma and real pain. This is not a sermon about pride. I'm not going to tell you all to love yourselves, though you should. And I'm not going to beg you to love queer people, though you should. And I'm not here to, in the words of Franklin E. Kameni, beg cringingly for mere privileges and be satisfied with the crumbs tossed to us. This is not a sermon about pride because pride cannot exist without liberation, and your queer siblings, especially your queer siblings of color, are far from liberated. There are plenty of sermons about pride, but I want to talk about something more radical. You can't love yourself into liberation. Begging for ourselves to be included in the dominant narrative is no way to demolish oppression. Widening the door is not the same as knocking the whole wall down. That's not to say we shouldn't be proud and that we shouldn't care for and nurture our innermost selves. But to be truly proud, we all need to be liberated from the dominant narrative and the systemic oppressions that it has built. Pride does not require action. Pride exists internally. And that makes it really dangerous because the illusion of safety within oneself suggests that the work is finished. Liberation is a springing board, and it means we need an uprising, a rebellion. Liberation is external, and liberation is community. We will be liberated when we center the most marginalized voices so that we aren't tempted by our privileges to get in first and shut the door behind us. None of us are free until all of us are free. And that's what Sylvia was saying. The white middle-class white club, even then, was leaving everyone else behind. forsaking women, transgender people, all their siblings of color, and those in jail and on the streets. Pride is a trick, a band-aid on a too-deep wound. Pride makes us believe that the solution to our problems is internal only, and gives us permission to nurse our internal pain under the guise that it will lead to freedom. But the reality is that there are collective solutions to our pain, and only community will bring them. The discussion and questioning required for liberation is something we all need to do together, and questioning is a spiritual act. No one should have the privilege of seeing themselves as the default human. If that makes you uncomfortable, if it makes you question what your concept of self is built on, I'm really glad. To cast off the dominance of straight, white, cisgender, able-bodied, neurotypical, wealthy men is not divisive. Anyone who suggests that it is has something to gain from ignoring and vilifying difference. Difference deserves to be emboldened and cherished. Queer people are not a divergence from the norm. We are the norm. By nature of existing, we are already the norm. We all need to really assess what we do and believe in our lives and about our identities that uphold the dominant narrative. And perhaps most importantly, deconstruct what about releasing the dominant narrative makes us feel so defensive. What power and privilege would we be giving up in letting that go? What would change about how we view our identities? Where that discomfort lives, we will find a way to create the community needed for the uprising of liberation. Imagine the queer people outside of Stonewall Inn in 1969. People who are blurring the concept of gender binarism by way of dress, behavior, relationship. Imagine them as they watch their bar, their gathering place, their symbol of liberation get raided by dirty cops looking for a payout. Imagine them as the crowd outside swells, the crowd outside yells, "We're not going to take this anymore." Imagine that crowd fighting back as their community is beaten, arrested, and dehumanized. Imagine them finding in the streets around them coins, trash, rocks, bricks, an uprooted parking meter, and using those items to literally fight back. Hold that image while I tell you that destruction is beautiful. The metaphor of throwing bricks is one of forward movement, of transformational destruction, of burning down what no longer works and nurturing what grows from the ashes. The system is not a bar in the village. The system is not the corrupt cops who literally tried to beat people into submission. The system is the complex interworking of so many daily injustices that allowed that bar to be illegal, that fostered police corruption, that encourages violence against queer people of color, and that empowers privileged people to see oppression as the consequence of being different. If we believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every person, then normative roles should be disgraceful to us. It is wholly unjust to expect anyone to fulfill a role that was created for them and without their permission. So when you say, "Oh, but queer people are just like us," or "I don't see color," think about what you're really saying. The implication is that difference is bad and that uniformity is the goal. You are assessing how much I am like you, and therefore how we all measure up to the patriarchy. And in the words of Hannah Gatsby, I was not made for or by men. I'm not asking you to change who you are. You were made perfectly from the same divine spark that connects all of us. I'm asking you to challenge your own perspective and really, truly embrace the sacred diversity of humanity. That shift in perspective is necessary for a beloved community to understand and uplift the most marginalized voices, so that we can all collectively demolish the systems that keep us trapped in needless, unjust roles. That kind of change, true liberation, can never and will never be done alone. White supremacist, patriarchal oppressions, are exactly where our shared faith compels us to throw righteous bricks.
That I can't break this away, because I tried.